Hi. The focus of this chat is going to be about the funding to do with kids with special needs and disabilities. The focus also will actually be the UK, but I'll go on to do more chats later on in the coming weeks about funding globally in other countries. But the reason why I want to focus on this is because there have been recent announcements about the amount of money being spent or possibly being needed to be spent on special needs within England. And I think, to be fair, I think this is a good case study. So, and I'll put the references and the articles that I've used in the links below, basically. Right. So I'm looking at a report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And essentially, they say that special needs and disabilities in England has faced unprecedented pressure over the past decade. Without substantial reform, it's unlikely to be unimaginable for local authorities for the coming years, or unmanageable, sorry. Fundamentally, this is due to the rocketing number of children and young people with education, health, and care plans. Children with EHCPs and those with the highest needs and local authorities are statutorily obliged to cover the costs of provision set out in these plans. The reason behind the rise in the EHCPs is complex, but potential explanations include increased severity of needs, extended recognition and diagnosis of needs, stronger incentives to seek statutory provision. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a bit, you'll know a little bit about my family and the background. My daughter is a cancer survivor. And one thing that's noticeable that they don't talk about within this and other articles is children and basically people with life-limiting conditions and illnesses who might not have otherwise survived 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but actually, thankfully, due to modern medicine and techniques, albeit in some areas slowly, actually they're not, the education system isn't necessarily either recognizing these children or the system isn't catching up. So essentially what you've got is you've got actually more children potentially entering into the special needs world and disability world who, quite frankly, wouldn't have otherwise survived. And I'm going to digress ever so slightly. Years ago, I chatted to somebody who, when he was a kid, he had a car accident and he got knocked over by a car. And had it been in the 1970s, when I was growing up as a kid, he would have literally been killed because of the safety devices within the cars. There weren't as many safety devices. Cars had greater impact and other bits and pieces. So essentially, he would have been dead. Quite frankly, he would have been killed. What's happening is, fortunately, cars have got safer. The roads have overall got safer, but actually, there's a potential that people are surviving more accidents, but they're actually having more. They're having basically hidden disabilities as a consequence of having the accidents. For example, acquired brain injuries. So the guy I was chatting to actually had an acquired brain injury. He was essentially brain damaged because he got knocked down by a car. But had he been born 10 years before and had the car accident had been 10 years before and the medicine wouldn't have been around, he essentially would have been dead. That's just the bottom line. As a result of that, he's got memory issues and he's struggled in places at schools because of the exam system and remembering. Fortunately, he's successfully employed, but this is an example of 10, 15, 20 years ago, people entering the education system, including the workplace, who would otherwise have died. So modern medicine is brilliant. It's saving people's lives, but it's impacting the education system, and it's not, and the numbers aren't necessarily taking that into consideration. Even if they're small numbers, it's still adding to the rising numbers. Now, if I carry on as well, and I'm going to go off ever so slightly, but I'll come back to the IFS. There's another thing that the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, also published, and it talked about August-born girls are 0.4% percentage points or 25% more likely to have a statement of special educational needs, and 8.1%, in other words, 72% more likely to have a non-statement of special educational needs. The corresponding figures for boys are 0.6%, in other words, 14%, and sorry, I just need to click here, 9.4%. So let's have a look. So they're higher for boys. Again, I'll put a link into the study. So the numbers are, quite frankly, huge. Now, this comes down to the funding of special educational needs. So it's great that the money's going up, and I'm going to go to the bottom of this study, and it's got a number of recommendations, and I am not criticizing the recommendations. I'm simply adding to the recommendations, and these principles can actually be applied and thought of globally. Again, my area and my area of personal interest is the economic sustainability behind special needs disabilities, the economic impact of hidden and visible disabilities, because it's a factor in my life, and it's a factor in my family's life, and it's impacted me throughout my life. So the study goes on to say the first default option is to continue with the current system of pupil-led top-up funding. Well, that's great, but where's the money going? Is it worthwhile? Would it take into consideration inflation? Again, while this is an English-focused study, this applies globally. So even if the funding is topped up for special educational needs, it's not still going to be enough, because you've got inflationary pressures, you've got fuel costs, you've got food costs, fuel costs, and everything, generally speaking, is rising, costing more. So the money that the education system, wherever they are, private or state funded, whatever it is, there's still going to be less. So there's going to be less money within the actual system overall. Now, here's the thing. You've got more people entering the system, the costs are going up, so you're actually getting less value for money. But you can spend the money, but what's the outcome? And actually, what is the outcome for the person? You know, like, I go and buy, I don't know, some milk. Great, lovely. I just buy I don't mean standard milk. I buy some milk. I want some, what's that stuff called? Not pasteurized stuff. I want, I've completely forgotten. I want organic milk. That's going to cost more. I believe I'm getting a better value for money because I'm getting a better product. But at the end of the day, that money, I don't know what value I'm getting. I don't know where it's going to, because building costs are going up, salaries are going up. Critically, electricity bills are going up, and with all the with all the goodwill in the world, and as a former lead IT person in the school 20 odd years ago, 22 years ago, when my budget was like $500,000 or more, where's the money going? Really, you know, like, electricity costs are going to go up. So are you getting good value for money for the IT systems for that support? So it says the option number one is to continue the top up the funding. Well, that's not sustainable. It's just the way it goes. The second option is to seek deliver provision in a more cost-effective way without affecting the overall quality. Okay, so what's the quality? Because as it currently stands, if I'm honest about it, I can't see there's not much quality coming out, to be honest about it. And it's no disrespect to colleagues who are in the education sector. Again, outside of We Can Access, I'm a senior lecturer of special needs, and I've supported over 200 people, about 200 people on their international MA dissertations globally. So I've spoken to people, and I've supported people from Chile to the USA to Canada to Luxembourg to Nigeria, the Gulf cooperation states, Malaysia, Japan, Indonesia, and it goes on, over 65 countries. And when they're talking about the overall quality, what quality are they looking for? Because each country, the school systems have a different way of defining quality. Teachers have performance targets. Schools have performance targets, and for whatever reasons, they're overseen by organisations. They need to get kids with qualifications. So in this article, and again, I'm not criticising the article, they haven't actually defined what the quality means. So when you're spending money on the special educational needs, yes, there are educational healthcare plans. Yes, there are plans and there's an agreement. But fundamentally, what value is being sought for that outcome? Is it the outcome for the school? Ultimately, it really should be the outcome for the child, because ultimately the education system, in my opinion, in my humble opinion as a parent, the outcome should be to enable the children to maximize their potential, and that has knock-on consequences and economic consequences on the health and well-being of the child, on the health and well-being of the parents or parent and carers, any siblings, and it improves the long-term outcome. So my question to everybody is, when people talk about the overall quality of education, what's the benchmark? Where is that coming from? So the second option is to seek provision in a more cost-effective way. But are they talking about cost-effective in the short term or in the long term? Because actually, is it the short term? In other words, great, we've got a budget for a year or 2 years, and we're just stumbling from budget to budget. But actually, the child who's got special needs, disabilities, person of determination, whatever label you want to put on it, the overall quality for them is measured in years. And it takes many, many years to see the long-term impact and quality of the outcomes. Well, in fact, organizations are looking in the short term. I would argue strongly that actually the education system needs to look at children from birth or from point of entry of that hidden or visible disability when they're identified up to the age of, let's say 22, 25, when they're potentially leading as independent life as possible. There should be a long-term plan that is flexible and that's adjustable, that meets the needs of the individual, in other words, the child or the person with the special needs or hidden disabilities, whatever label, and then have a look on the wider consequences on society. So I question, what do they mean by cost effective and quality? Next, the third connected option would be to reform the system such that the educational healthcare plans no longer create statutory obligations. Again, I'm not criticizing the IFS. They're a great organization, phenomenal work that they do. Here's the thing though, if there aren't statutory obligations for any organization, that means that the organizations that are there who are seeking to profit from the system might not be held accountable. So actually, when they're talking about, it talks about enabling local authorities and provisions to make plans to meet rising needs across the population as a whole may also need to more efficient and equitable way to deliver provision. But what do they mean efficiency? Again, are they looking in the short term or are they looking in the long term? Because to me, as a parent of a child who's a cancer survivor, to me, I'm looking 5, 10, 15 years ahead, 20 years ahead. It's a bit like investing. To be honest about it, it is actually investment. I was listening to LBC, which is a UK-based radio station, and they had I think it was the investment hour at 6 o'clock last night. And there were some guys on there that, and it's a regular feature there, they talk about investment. Are you prepared to lose money? And also, if you invest in it, you're investing for the long term. Well, I would argue the case that actually, again, when we're talking about efficiency and equitable ways to deliver provision, you need to look in the long term for the person that's at the heart of it, which is the child. So what is the most efficient and equitable way to deliver a service for the child and the parents and or carers and siblings to enable them to have a successful, healthy, fruitful life? As a result of that, you improve their mental health, you improve their skill basis, and actually overall, you reduce the budgets within the prison service, within the health service, within the, and I don't mean prison service, it's just because I gave a talk about in a previous video, I think it was 2 videos before, about the school to prison pipeline. So if you look at again, health, actually by improving improving the efficiency on the system for the children, you're improving the mental and physical health of the parents. And please don't forget, we also have aging populations, a reduction in the population, and also potentially older parents. So actually the parents' ability to support their children later in life is potentially reduced because actually you've got that situation, which sort of I'm in. I'm 53, I've got a teenage kid, and my mum's still alive. So actually, you've got my health, my daughter's health, and my mother's health, and I'm stuck in the middle. And then if the children with special needs, hidden disabilities, access issues, whatever you like to call it, are not upskilled, actually, it's going to be harder for them to support the older generations. So when I mean by this, they need to look in the long term, a 5-10 year plan with this, not short-term budgets. Next, the fourth option is to provide further specific services to support children, including earlier intervention before problems become more severe and costly. That's brilliant, that's amazing, and I totally agree with this. And it says here, improving access to psychology and speech and language therapists may also be a part of sensible package reforms. That fourth option applies to anywhere globally. We're talking about the fourth option is to provide specific services to support children, including earlier interventions before the problems become more severe and costly. And they're talking about more speech therapists. There is a big, huge problem, and I'm talking about not only in England, potentially globally. Where are the speech therapists going to come from? Where are the psychologists going to come from? Who are they going to pay? And one thing that I didn't think I was going to bring up on this, but I will, which is culture. Which is culture and people accepting that the person has a special need, hidden or visible disability, whatever label. Here's the thing. Many years ago, I used to be a teacher in an autistic school. You're talking about, I don't know, 2012, I think I left. Yeah, it must have been about 2012. I worked at a school for autistic children for about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I'd worked in special needs settings as well. But I'd seen, so I've got experience. And as a parent, I was like going, and I was talking to parents from different cultural backgrounds within my educational sphere, and also, as a teacher, as a professional, I'd gone and spoken about, oh, I think your child might have, oh, I think you have. And I'm not going on about cultures or anything else, but it's about the ability for people to recognize and acknowledge that the individual might have some form of special needs or hidden or visible disability. And there are cultural and social barriers and stigmas around it. Not only have you got those, but you've got the individual who might not want to accept it for whatever reasons, because because it's just hard. Now, as a parent, I'm going to refer back to my daughter and the cancer journey. Emma and I thought something was wrong with our daughter. Yes, this is about the early intervention before. Emma and I had thought something was wrong with Addie for a while. Yeah, we suspected something wrong. There were habits, there were things, there weren't things that were going right. And we went to our local GP and we said, something is wrong. And the GP said, not sure, don't know, don't have time. So the issue was still going on. We had identified there was something wrong as parents. We had identified that there was something wrong with our daughter and we wanted some form of intervention. The doctor had said no. So we thought, okay, what do we do? We went back to the doctor, I think it was a couple of weeks later, and they said, well, I could refer you to the health service, but it could take you a while. So you might want to go private. And we thought, have we got the money? Not sure. Let's dig up the money. We're getting worried. So we went privately, and it cost us £600 or £700 to go privately to get our daughter checked out for adenoids. It wasn't that. It was money that we really didn't have, but we were concerned. And still the issues were going on, and still we kept on bugging. We were told we were bugging. We were being persistent parents. We were being a pain parents. And we'd identified this, and we were looking for early intervention. And still we got rejected by the medical system until my sister, who at the time was working with clinicians, said, something's wrong. You need to be really, really strong with the doctors. This is how you need to talk to them. So we went back. We got an appointment to see a pediatrician. And here's the thing. This was 6 months, around about 6 months after we had initially identified the early intervention, the problem. And I come back to the costly and severe, the severe and costly. Because then the pediatrician took us aside and said, okay, let's give your daughter a CT scan. Addie didn't wake up from that scan. It was half an hour, and I can vividly remember as I'm talking on this thing, they came back to us and said, Mr. and Mrs. Barra, we need to tell you something. Your daughter has got a 4.5 centimetre mass behind her head, and we are talking to another hospital. And Addie got blue lighted, emergency transferred to another hospital, where Addie was 12 hours from dying as a result of a brain tumour, or as a result of the result of a brain tumour. Now, I'm talking openly about this because it comes down to the early intervention and problems more severe and costly. What happened was this cost the system more. Addie would still have had the brain tumour, but actually what went on and the severity of the treatment cost the system more. Yet the professionals that we put our trust in, and I'm not having a go at certain or any professionals, but we were rejected by a couple of professionals who were dismissive. And what happened was, a year later, we went back to the same doctor and said, just going, because just as a regular going to the doctor thing with our daughter, and they said, and I quote, oh, I thought it was a brain tumour, but I didn't want to worry you. Here's the thing, and this is my point, and I'm not having a go at the medical profession or anybody else, but it comes down to interventions, severity, and costly. Because what you need is, when you're working with people and children and with hidden and visible disabilities, you need everybody to work together, regardless of cultural and social stigmas, and actually look at the challenges and look at the fundamental functionality of that person and say, are they functioning in the way that they should according to all of these things, and not dismiss it. So as a result of that, it's a multidisciplinary team needs to come together, put aside their culture, social stigmas, overcome language and everything else, and go, what is the fundamental problem? And I've got an engineering background. I was an apprentice aircraft engineer back in the day when I was like 17. So I'm looking at this as there is a fundamental mechanical problem, which was with our daughter, and what is the problem and how can we find this out? But because professionals were doubting, putting labels on the parents, putting labels on the system, it was dismissed. And again, there are other cases where I know of where children have been misdiagnosed as not having ASD, autistic spectrum disorder, or others because of labels, because of systems, because of tests. So it's great to say that the early intervention, but you need all of the stakeholders and all of the professionals to be on board and be objective and go, what is the end result? Also, I come back to the fact that it takes time to train up speech therapists, occupational therapists, and everybody else. And what is the financial incentive for these people to do it? Because I remember, again, this is going back a few years, I remember speaking to a speech therapist maybe about 5 years ago, and they had left the NHS because the training wasn't there, the National Health Service, the training wasn't there, the career development wasn't there, and the financial reward wasn't there. So they chose to leave and they set up privately, and they were earning more money with less stress privately. But what that meant was that took a speech therapist out of the system. And this person was not alone. And again, I chatted recently to an occupational therapist there who had trained, they'd done their training, they'd got funded by an organization, they did their stint in the organization, and then they left and they set up privately. So it's got to be financially worth people's whiles to work within the system. Otherwise, you're literally going to get a brain drain within the system in order to not do the early intervention, and it's going to cost more. I will add one more point, which is the churn and burn of teachers. When I was growing up, again, I'm 53, in the 1970s, I think, and I could be wrong, in England, on average, teachers were maybe staying in the system 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah, I remember some teachers, most of my teachers were in the business for 20 odd years. Yeah. Nowadays, certainly within England, I think on average, you're going to get an experienced teacher is 3 to 5 years, not that much longer. So when they're talking about early interventions, how are you going to get early intervention if you don't have if you're not retaining and maintaining qualified people and enabling people to build up the knowledge to identify issues? So something fundamentally and structurally needs to change within the education system to enhance retention of teachers, good quality teachers, to help with that early intervention. And I am going to come out with one more thing, which I didn't mean to. I also strongly believe that if you're talking about teachers, all teachers should have some form of experience in early years, even if it's a week or two, because the early years knowledge is very, very good, and maybe even longer. I would argue that actually people in the early years understand about child development, which means they can then identify issues earlier, which would save more money. Okay, the fifth option is to increase capacity in state-funded specialist sectors. This almost certainly needs to be certainly needed, given that many special schools are at or over capacity. That's great. That's lovely. What are the threshold for needs? What are we making for judgments? I'm skipping along. The previous government had previously increased capital spending to increase the number of special places. That's great. That's amazing. You want to increase the state's increase the capacity. What about the quality of the people that are going in the sector? Yes. I would also argue, and it's like, however, this is costly in the slow process. Great. You want to increase the capacity. That's lovely. That doesn't really support inclusion, though, does it? You know, like the dream, the aim of inclusion. And then what you have is you potentially have a disconnect between people who have got special needs, neurodiverse, whatever you like to call it, and then they're going to be put in other places. So there's a balance to be made between inclusion and specialist provisions. And we don't want to go back to the 1970s and 60s, where you've actually got this essentially people don't recognize, identify, see people with hidden and visible disabilities, and they're essentially locked away like they used to be in the past. You don't want to move that, but ultimately You're talking about state-funded specialist sector, increasing specialist schools. Here's the problem. Again, they've identified that it's going to take time to build schools. If you look at the demographics, less children potentially are being born, which means by the time those schools are going to be built, are the children still going to be around? So is that cost effective? Is that efficient in the long term? And this applies, by the way, to countries who have got a downturn in their population growth, which is most European or Western nations and many countries in the ASEAN countries or in Asia. Yeah, there are demographic shifts. I believe in South Korea, I don't know what the overall number of children being born overall, but I think it's like 0.7%. I can't quite remember what the number is, but it's certainly the birth rates are dropping dramatically. In South Korea stands out. I think China also stands out as well. The birth rates are dropping dramatically. I know that in certain countries within Africa, the continent, the population is growing exponentially, and I believe Egypt has got a big population growth. I'm not sure about Nigeria as well, but there are another number of countries. But certainly in certain countries, you're getting a population decrease. So is it worth spending the money on the buildings because you're simply not getting the kids born? Now, they're talking about the last option, to deliver more support within mainstream schools, which is clearly already a long-run priority for the new government. And it goes on to say that the substantial changes would likely require extra investment in spending, extra day-to-day spending, and a lot of work in schools and government to prepare for the change. The government has already provided some investment, around 740 million in 2025, 2026, but this hasn't been fully committed to day-to-day resources. That's brilliant. That's amazing. That's a load of money. Where's it going to be spent? The bottom line is, and although this is a UK-centric, or sorry, not UK, this is an English-centric discussion, it comes down to 740 million sounds amazing. It sounds a brilliant amount of money. But our energy bills are going up. The food prices are going up. The salaries, the cost of employing people are going up. Yes, business costs overall are going up. So the suppliers for the schools, their costs are going to go up. So I don't know, and that applies again, I believe, globally. In that, certainly from my understanding in the USA, I've seen that your gas prices, your fuel prices have gone up a lot. Your food prices have gone up tremendously. And I believe that applies in, I think it's Germany and other countries as well. Overall, the cost of living has increased, which means it's lovely saying in England, 740 million. How much of that is real term increased in investment? And it's lovely, for example, I'm going to pick up on 740 million. You can do a training day. How effective is that training going to be? So what's the point? Where am I going with this? And where was I really the summary of where I'm going with this? Basically, the numbers of children with hidden and visible disabilities are increasing, and it's not necessarily being recognized globally. You've got more people and more children surviving and living with chronic health conditions like cancer, like acquired brain injuries. So you're getting more children and people who wouldn't necessarily have been born or survived entering in the system. That's one factor. You've also got inflationary pressures and you've got costs going up. So there's a real balance. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the person and the child. I'm also going to say one thing as well. There is August born. I'm going to bring back to the August born kids. At the age of 11, again, this comes from the IFS. At the age of 11, August born girls are 0.4%, 25% more likely to have a statement of special educational needs. And boys are 14% more. Yeah, I'm going to click on this study if I can find the numbers. Let's have a look. And I can't remember when this is from either. Let's have a look. In essence, where are we? Policies, age. Right. So what you've got is, I would argue again, how many of these children with special educational needs or disabilities or whatever you like to call it are born later in the academic year? And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, let's say, for instance, Australia, I'm watching this from Australia, it's how many of the children with special educational needs or have got those labels are born later in the academic year. I would argue, and I'm not sure how it works in other education systems, this argument has been going on for years and years and years. Why can't the children who are being born later in the academic year, why can't they be put in the year quote unquote below? Because really what it comes down to is, are you putting them in the year below, or are you putting them where they're cognitively and physically functioning the best to enable them not to be labeled with special educational needs or any other issues, and they are cognitively ready and more equipped to go into the school system and the education system, so they won't be labeled as special educational needs. So it's not necessarily about spending more money. It's looking at the populations. It's looking at actually the child itself or themselves and the parents, and what outcome do we really want as a society, from each society, wherever you are. It doesn't matter if you're in England, Wales, Scotland, if you're in America, Canada, Chile, if you're in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia. What fundamentally does the education system want for children? What does it fundamentally want for children of determination, with special needs, with hidden disabilities? What does each society want for that child in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time? Once the society has agreed what they want from it, I would argue that then a plan is taken in place to then enable those children to fulfill those needs. And this is a long-term strategic plan for children with hidden and visible disabilities. Once that has been decided, once that's been agreed, what the vision is for the future, then and only then can be a plan put in place on how the society will get there. Is it about the qualifications? Is it about the money? Where in society, how can we put this puzzle together? But where's the long-term vision? And I don't see a long-term vision, certainly in England. I can't speak for the rest of the world because I haven't explored it in enough detail. What I have done is I've spoken to people around the world and heard it, but I have not read specific policies. So in democratic nations, which are brilliant and they have so much value, but there's a fundamental flaw within the education system, is that people are looking from election cycle to election cycle to election cycle. And what they're not looking forward is a long-term plan for children with hidden and visible disabilities who can then work forwards. And I strongly believe in democratic countries that actually policies and politics should be put aside, and actually the politicians should come together and actually agree a joint manifesto on what the plan is for children with hidden and visible disabilities, and then together. They can have their own politics. You can argue about politics, about economics, work, and other bits and pieces. But I'm talking about for this specific group, this specific population. I'm doing a call to action that politicians, whatever country you're in, from whatever political party, you come together and you form a long-term strategy. And that's not in your manifesto commitments. That's not in anything else. That's an agreed national strategy for 5, 10, 15 years that can then enable one political party or the organization, or the party that's in power can transfer that over to the other. Without that, there will always be a disjointed education system. It's going to cost society more, and it's going to cost the children more, and it will cost the parents, and it's just going to increase costs. I didn't mean for this to go on for so long, but this is a vital issue, and I believe this is structurally what it comes down to. You can spend all the money in the world on special needs and disabilities and children with hidden and visible disabilities. But unless you come out with a long-term plan and think long-term, the system will lurch from one cycle to another, and it's only going to get fundamentally worse. Thank you so much for your time. If you found this of any value, please like, subscribe, share. If you've got any questions, let me know, and I will put the links to the stuff that I was referring to, the articles that I was referring to, in the comments below. Sorry, in the description below. If you've got any questions, let me know. And finally, because I need to learn to stop talking, in essence, what I've spoken about in England, while it may apply to England, it applies to all countries across the globe. I simply used England as a case study, so to speak, because I live in England. My children are educated in England. I will be exploring other countries in the coming weeks. Take care, have a lovely day, and once again, I'm really grateful for your time.